What happens when the whole world starts calling wrong normal? When corruption grows so much that it no longer causes indignation, just indifference? What if you were living in a time when everyone believes that nothing will happen? But has heaven ever made a decision? In the days of Noah is not just an ancient expression. It's a warning that echoes to this day. According to the Bible, there was a time when violence dominated the streets. Evil multiplied in thoughts and humanity walked away from God without any intention of returning. It was not a sudden drop. It was a gradual distancing, silent, progressive. Noah's generation built cities, developed culture, prospered. But as civilization advanced externally, something rotted internally. The biblical text says that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was evil continually. It wasn't just behavior. It was intention. It was nature being shaped by the repetition of error. And in the middle of an entire society that was going in the same direction, a man decided to go against the grain. Noah was not perfect, but he was different. While everyone ignored God, he listened. While everyone mocked, he obeyed. While everyone lived as if tomorrow was guaranteed, he built something for a future that no one else believed in. Imagine spending years building an ark on dry land. No rain, no visible signs, just a promise. Imagine being called crazy on a daily basis. Imagine sustaining your faith when there is no immediate evidence that anything is going to happen. The story of Noah is not just about a flood. It's about perseverance when no one understands. It's about fidelity in the midst of cultural pressure. It's about continuing to obey even when everything around you says you're overreacting. But there is a detail that we often forget. The trial did not come without warning. Before the water fell, there was time. Before the door closed, there was an opportunity. Before the destruction, there was patience. God did not act impulsively. There was a wait. There was a call. There was visible construction of the ark, a constant symbol that something was about to happen. The ark itself was a silent sermon being held up before all. And then, one day, the door was closed. Not by Noah, but by God. And the rain began. Jesus sighed that as it was in the days of Noah, so it would be also. People were eating, drinking, getting married, planning for the future, until the moment when everything changed. The question that remains is not only about the past, it's about the present. Are we living in similar days? Is yesterday's indifference repeated today? And more importantly, which side would we be on? In this biblical film, you'll delve into the story of Noah beyond the surface. You will understand the context of the generation that ignored the warnings, the weight of building in silence while the world laughed, and the deep meaning of a door that once closed. Because in the days of Noah is not just historical memory. It can be a mirror and maybe a warning. Before we continue this journey, let me make you a simple invitation. If this type of content strengthens your faith and makes you reflect more deeply on the Word, it already leaves your like now. This helps much more than it seems and makes this message reach other people who also need to listen. And I want to know from you, do you believe that we are living in days similar to those of Noah? Comment below. I actually read the comments, and many of the next videos are born out of these conversations. If you are not yet subscribed, subscribe to the channel. Every week, we are bringing you Bible stories told in a deep, cinematic and reflective way to strengthen your spiritual walk. Now, let's go back to the days of Noah. The Bible describes that time with a phrase that should make us stop. The wickedness of man will multiply on the earth. It was not just an isolated increase in errors. It was an entire culture being shaped by corruption. Violence was no exception. It was routine. Selfishness was not fought, it was celebrated. What once caused outrage now produced entertainment. But there is something even deeper in the text. He says that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was continually evil. This means that the problem was not only in the visible actions, it was in the intention, motivation inside. When the heart becomes accustomed to error, error ceases to look like error. The fear of God does not disappear overnight. He is being replaced. First, for self-sufficiency, then by the normalization of sign, and finally, by spiritual indifference. In Noah's day, people continued to live their lives normally. They worked, they built, they did business, they celebrated marriages, they planned for the future. The outward appearance was one of progress, but the external progress hid the interior decadence. This is one of the most unsettling points in the story. There was no visible sign of imminent collapse. It was not a generation that seemed on the verge of ending. It was a comfortable generation. And perhaps that's exactly what makes this narrative so disturbing. The judgment did not come at a time of apparent chaos. It came in the midst of normality. When a society loses the fear of God, it loses the ability to recognize limits. And when there are no limits, everything becomes justifiable. What was once considered wrong becomes evolution. What was once called sin becomes expression. What was once seen as danger becomes freedom. And so, little by little, the collective consciousness is being anesthetized. In Noah's day, the problem was not a lack of intelligence. It was not the absence of technology. It was not an incapacity for social organization. It was an absence of reverence. The fear of God is not irrational fear. It is awareness that there is a higher standard than our desires. It is recognition of moral authority above human opinion. When this fear disappears, humanity begins to redefine right and wrong according to its own convenience. And that's exactly what happened. Corruption is no longer hidden. Violence is no longer condemned. The ego is no longer confronted. And when an entire generation walks in the same direction, anyone who dares to go against the grain seems exaggerated. It is in this scenario that the story of Noah begins to gain weight, because he did not live in a partially corrupted world. He lived in a world totally dominated by spiritual indifference. The question that echoes is simple but profound. How to remain faithful when everyone around considers it unnecessary? How do you keep the fear when no one else seems to care? Perhaps the answer starts here. Before Noah built the ark, he had to decide that he would not live like the rest of the generation. And that decision started in the heart. Because every great fall begins with the loss of fear, and every great restoration begins with his recovery. Now, in the midst of this generation immersed in the normality of corruption, a man appears who decides to walk differently. And that's when everything starts to change. In the midst of a generation that had lost its fear, a simple but powerful phrase emerges. Noah walked with God. It doesn't say that he just believed. It does not say that he attended religious moments. It doesn't say he was perfect. He says that he walked. Walking implies constancy. It implies direction. It implies daily relationship. While the world was moving away from God, Noah was walking in the opposite direction. And this reveals something essential. Fidelity does not begin with great acts. It starts in daily steps. Noah did not wake up one day determined to build a gigantic ark. Before that, he had already decided to live differently. His public obedience was the consequence of a private intimacy. In a generation where everyone was aligned with the dominant culture, he chose to align himself with God, and that inevitably brought isolation. Being different is never comfortable, especially when the majority is sure that they are right. Imagine living in a society where no one shares your spiritual vision, where values are inverted, where that which you consider reverent is treated as irrelevant. Noah did not have a large community to support him. There were no crowds encouraging his faith. He had a decision, the decision to walk with God. And that's perhaps the most challenging part of the story, because it is easier to follow the crowd than to hold convictions in silence. The biblical text also calls Noah righteous and upright among his contemporaries. That doesn't mean he never made a mistake. It means that his direction was different. His standard was different. He did not live guided by cultural pressure. He lived guided by spiritual conviction. In times of moral confusion, integrity becomes a form of resistance. While others sought immediate pleasure, Noah sought divine approval. While others lived for the now, he lived with consciousness of the eternal. And here's something profound. Before, God entrusted Noah with the responsibility of saving his family. He saw the character that Noah already displayed in secret. Great missions are not given to distracted people. The ark was a consequence. The walk came first. Perhaps the strongest point of this moment in history is this: God did not seek absolute perfection. He was looking for someone willing to walk with him. And when everyone goes in the same wrong direction, the one who chooses a different path becomes a living sign of contrast. Noah was that contrast. His life silently said that it was still possible to live in another way, that it was still possible to fear God, that it was still possible to choose holiness, even when no one else did. But walking differently has a cost. It means giving up majority approval. It means accepting misunderstanding. It means trusting when there is no applause. And it was precisely this disposition that prepared Noah for what was to follow. Because the next step would not just be to live differently. It would be building something that no one had ever seen. And that would require more than conviction. It would require active faith. After years of walking with God in silence, Noah receives an order that would completely change his life: build an ark. It was not a symbolic suggestion. It was not a spiritual metaphor. It was a detailed instruction, exact measurements, type of wood, internal structure, divisions, height, length. God did not ask only for inner faith. He called for visible action. And this is where the story starts to get uncomfortable. Because until that moment, Noah could be discreetly faithful. But now his obedience would be public. Imagine a price. A man starting to build a gigantic structure on dry land. No rain. No alarming weather forecast. Without any historical record of anything like it. The Bible doesn't describe mockery, but we can imagine laughs, comments, irony. What is this for? Do you really believe that? That will never happen. The construction of the ark was not a quick event. It was years, decades, each day repeating the same task, each day reaffirming the same conviction. Noah's faith was not tested in a moment of crisis. It was proven in repetition. It is easy to declare faith in an emotional moment. It is more difficult to sustain faith when nothing changes externally. The sky was still blue. The land was still dry. The city's routine continued. But Noah kept building. Each hammer was an act of trust. Each board fitted together was a silent statement. I believe what God has said. And perhaps this is the deepest part of this story. The ark was not just a means of future salvation. It was a present proof of obedience. While others invested in immediate comfort, Noah invested in something that would only make sense in the future. This requires spiritual vision, because true faith does not react to what is visible. She responds to what was promised. But there is something even more challenging. During the entire construction period, nothing indicated urgency. No constant threatening clouds. No shaking on the ground. No immediate sign. And yet, he kept going. Perhaps the greatest test of faith is not when everything seems to fall apart. Maybe it's when nothing seems to happen. It is in this silence that many give up. Maybe I got it wrong. Maybe God didn't speak. Maybe I'm exaggerating. But Noah did not back down. He did not build it because of social pressure. He did not build by popular confirmation. He built because God spoke. And here's a crucial point. His obedience began long before the first drop of rain. When the waters finally came, the ark was ready. Because faith is not preparing after the sign. It is to prepare beforehand. And this confronts us directly. What are we building today that will only make sense tomorrow? What decisions are we putting off because they seem exaggerated in the eyes of others? Noah's generation saw an ark being built for years, but he confused divine patience with the absence of consequence. They interpreted the silence as a lack of judgment, and this interpretation would cost everything, because the same sky that seemed calm was about to open, and when it opened, there was no more time to start building. There is a detail in the story of Noah that often goes unnoticed. The flood was not immediate. Between the announcement and the execution, there was time. enough time to build a gigantic ark, enough time for everyone to see, enough time to reflect. God could have acted instantaneously, but he did not act. This reveals something profound about divine character. Before judgment, there is patience. The ark was not just a salvation project for Noah and his family. It was also a visible sign for the entire generation, a constant reminder that something was coming. Everyone knew. Everyone had the opportunity to question, but opportunity does not guarantee regret. The Bible says that God's Spirit would not contend with man forever. This means that there is a limit to human resistance to grace. God is patient, but it is not indifferent. In Noah's day, the building of the ark was a period of extended mercy. Each additional day was a chance. Each year that passed without rain was an extension of grace. But the problem was not in the lack of warning. I was in the absence of an answer. When a generation becomes accustomed to its own corruption, it begins to interpret God's patience as approval. If nothing has happened so far, maybe nothing will happen. If the judgment were real, it would have come by now. And so, mercy is confounded with permission. But divine patience does not mean the absence of justice. It means opportunity for change. The time between promise and fulfillment was a silent invitation. Come back. The ark, erected in the middle of the landscape, was a daily visual sermon, a structure that is impossible to ignore, a constant reminder that there was a different way. But change requires humility, and humility is rare in times of collective self-sufficiency. Perhaps the most solemn moment in this story is not the rain beginning to fall. Perhaps it is the period when nothing happened, and even then, God waited. Because silence before judgment is the space of mercy. Noah kept building, the world went on living, and God kept waiting until the time was fulfilled. There is something profoundly solemn about this. Patience has a limit determined by justice, not because God loses control, but because evil cannot remain forever without consequence. And then the day comes when the wait ends, not because God did not want to save, but because the generation did not want to listen. What makes this part of the story so impactful is not just what God has done, it is how long he waited before he did. And this waiting reveals both his mercy and his justice. Because before the door closes, it was open for a long time, after years of construction, after decades of patience, after countless ignored opportunities. The day has come. The Bible describes the moment with a simplicity that hides its depth. The animals entered the ark. Noah's family entered. And then, a short but solemn sentence, and the Lord shut the door. It wasn't Noah. That changes everything. If it had been Noah, one could argue that there was still room for negotiation, that maybe it was just a human decision. But when God closes, there is no human appeal that can reverse it. That sound of the door closing was not just wood touching wood. It was the end of a time. For years, the ark was a sign of hope. Now, it became a dividing line. Inside, security. Out, consequence. What makes this moment so impactful is that nothing extraordinary had yet happened. The sky had not yet broken. The rain had not yet fallen. Outwardly, it seemed like an ordinary day, but spiritually, everything had changed. This is the point that many ignore. The decisive moment was not when the rain started. That's when the door closed. Because after that, even if someone believed, it was too late. Noah's generation likely continued their routines that day. Some may have observed the closed ark with curiosity. Others may have laughed once more, until the first thunder echoed and the first drop fell. Imagine the emotional impact of that moment. It wasn't a gentle drizzle. It was the beginning of something that had never been seen. The waters began to rise. The earth began to give way. On those they had ignored for years, began to understand in minutes. But belated understanding does not reopen doors closed by God. That is the most solemn part of the story. Mercy has time. Patience has a limit. The opportunity has a deadline. While the ark was open, Entering required faith. After it closed, wanting to get in required desperation. And there is a huge difference between faith and despair. Faith acts first. Despair reacts later. In Noah's day, the world believed when there was no longer any way to respond. And that image echoes through the words of Jesus when he compares that time to the future. It will not be the absence of signs that will be the problem. It will be the delay in responding to them. The closed door of the ark does not represent only judgment. It represents the seriousness of postponed decisions, because there are times when the time of choice ends, and when God closes, it's not for lack of love. It is because the period of grace has been fully offered. And then the waters began to rise. When the rain began to fall, she didn't ask who people believed. She just fell. Water has made no distinction between rich and poor, between influential and anonymous, between known and forgotten. She revealed. For years, the difference between Noah and his generation seemed small. He built. They lived normally. He was talking about something that was coming. They ignored it. But when the waters rose, the difference became impossible to deny. Invisible preparation has become visible survival. And here's something profound. The rain didn't create the separation. It only exposed a separation that already existed. Long before the first drop fell, two groups were already defined. One group decided to trust. Another decided to ignore it. The water only revealed who had taken the warning seriously. This is how life's defining moments work. They don't build character, they reveal character. They do not produce instant faith, they expose whether it already existed. While the world laughed, Noah worked. While the world was distracted, he was preparing. And when the unexpected happened, he didn't have to start from scratch. He was already inside the ark. Perhaps the most confrontational point in this part of the story is this. It was not the intensity of the rain that saved anyone. It was the decision made before it. Many only realize the urgency when the water is already rising. But true faith does not wait for dramatic signs to act. In Noah's day, preparation seemed exaggerated. Obedience seemed radical. The construction seemed unnecessary. Until it stopped seeming. The moment of crisis was not the moment of construction. It was the moment of revelation. And this leads us to an inevitable question. We are preparing while there is still time, or waiting for the rain to start, and then deciding, because when the water began to rise, there was no more hammer, there was no more wood, there was no more opportunity to start the ark. There was only consequence. The flood story is not just about destruction. It's about preparation, about understanding that obedience before the crisis is what sustains during the crisis. And perhaps the quietest and most powerful part is this: while the waters rose outside, there was peace inside, not because the storm wasn't real, but because the decision had already been made. And in the end, it wasn't physical strength that saved Noah. It was the anticipated fidelity. The water revealed who was prepared, and it always reveals. Centuries after the flood, when many already saw the story of Noah only as a distant memory, Jesus made a statement that crosses time. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be. He could have chosen any other historical example. He could have spoken of wars, of empires, of visible catastrophes, but he chose Noah, and the most surprising thing is what he highlights. Jesus does not speak first of violence. It does not immediately mention corruption. He describes something seemingly ordinary. People ate, drank, married and gave in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. In other words, normality. The comparison does not begin with obvious chaos. It starts with everyday distraction. In Noah's day, the problem was not a lack of activity. It was an absence of spiritual perception. Life went on. The plans continued. The projects continued. But no one realized that time was running out. And this is where the comparison of Jesus becomes uncomfortable. He did not say that the last few days would only be violent. He said they would be similar to those days when people were too busy to realize what really mattered. distraction can be more dangerous than open rebellion, because rebelliousness still recognizes that there is something to oppose. Distraction simply ignores it. In Noah's day, the generation did not wake up thinking, "Let's defy God." They simply lived as if he was not relevant, and that's the warning. Jesus did not use Noah to cause panic. He used it to awaken consciousness. Because the biggest risk is not persecution, it is indifference. It is to continue living as if there was always more time, as if spiritual decisions could be postponed indefinitely. In Noah's day, time ended unexpectedly for many, not because there was a lack of signs, but because there was a lack of attention. And when Jesus makes this comparison, he is saying something powerful. The story was not just an isolated event. It was a pattern of divine patience, a warning pattern, a pattern of choice, and a pattern of late response from the majority. This puts us before an inevitable question. If we were living in the days of Noah, would we recognize the signs? Or would we be too busy building our own projects to realize that time is running out? Jesus did not tell this story to scare. He told to prepare. Because just as the ark was built before the rain, spiritual preparation also takes place before the decisive moment. And perhaps the most serious part of the comparison is this. In Noah's day, few took it seriously, and Jesus indicates that, again, many will not take it, but there will always be those who choose to listen, and it is this choice that defines everything. When we think of Noah's day, the most immediate image is that of the rain, of the waters covering the earth, of the ark floating in the midst of the storm. But this story represents something much deeper than an extraordinary weather event. It represents a spiritual pattern. Noah's day symbolizes the moment when an entire generation normalizes its estrangement from God. It's not just about violence or visible corruption. It's about the gradual loss of spiritual awareness. That's when the human heart begins to say, "We don't need direction anymore. We can decide what's right. There will be no consequences." Noah's day represents the illusion of security. People felt stable. The routine was established. Life took its course. Nothing needed to humanize that generation here. And perhaps that's the most unsettling part. Collapse didn't seem imminent. The ark was visible. The warning was clear. But everyday life spoke louder. The days of Noah also represent something even more personal, the struggle between faith and postponement. How many important decisions are postponed because there is still time? How many changes are left for later because nothing has happened so far? Noah's generation was not destroyed by total ignorance. It was destroyed by the repetition of indifference. Each day that nothing happened reinforced the false sense that nothing would happen. And this is profoundly human. We confuse patience with permission. We confuse silence with absence. We confuse delay with cancellation. But Noah's day shows that the time of mercy does not wipe out the day of accountability. This story also represents the faithful minority. There will always be a crowd comfortable with the current status, and there will always be few willing to live differently. The ark symbolizes choice. It was there, accessible, not hidden, not secret. But getting in required something that many were unwilling to offer: humility. Entering the ark meant admitting that Noah was right. It meant acknowledging that the warning was real. It meant changing direction, and pride rarely allows that. Noah's day, therefore, is not just about judgment. They are about decision, about choosing to build when no one understands, about choosing to listen when everyone else ignores it, about choosing to trust when the sky is still clear. Basically, this story does not only speak of an old generation, it speaks of the dynamics of the human heart in any age, because there will always be distractions. There will always be justifications. There will always be voices saying that it is an exaggeration, but there will also always be the opportunity to walk differently. Noah's days represent the time when time seems abundant, until it ceases to be. And perhaps the greatest symbol of this narrative is not water. That were open for years, closed in an instant, and between these two moments, a silent choice being made every day. Noah's story does not end at the waters. It ends in a question. If we were living in the days of Noah, where would we be? Laughing at the construction, postponing decisions, or helping to lift the ark? Because in the end, the difference was not in physical strength. It wasn't in intelligence. He was not in social position. It was in response to the warning. Noah was not saved because he was better than everyone. He was saved because he took God seriously before it was urgent. And perhaps this is the most confrontational application for us today. We are living in days of constant distraction. Too much information, too much noise, too many occupations. Is it possible to be active and spiritually asleep? It is possible to be busy and unprepared. Is it possible to believe and still postpone? Noah's generation did not wake up thinking that this would be the last day of normalcy, but it was. And this teaches us something profound. The decisive moment rarely feels decisive when it is happening. That is why preparation does not begin in the crisis. It starts with the daily choice. The ark today is not made of wood. It is made of positioning. It is made up of invisible decisions, of integrity when no one sees, of fidelity when no one applauds. Maybe you're living in a time when continuing to obey seems exaggerated. Perhaps building your ark seems strange in the eyes of others. But true faith has never been about public approval. It was about alignment with God. In Noah's day, few understood while there was still time. The question that remains is simple, but urgent. Are we living as if there is always more time? Or are we preparing while the door is still open? Because the door has been open for years. But one day, it was closed. And when it was closed, there was no debate. There was no extension. There was no new chance to start building. Today, the door is still open. Today, there is still time to decide. There is still time to adjust the direction. There is still time to choose a different floor. But this story reminds us of something solemn. The time of grace is not infinite. And perhaps the biggest mistake is not to reject it openly. Be it simply postponing. Thanks for watching.